After the Boston Globe and others exposed decades of sexual abuse by Catholic priests, their reporting sent shockwaves through the church. By far, that was not the end of the story. Now a new book is shining a light on more than a century of abuse at a Catholic orphanage in New England. Ghosts of the Orphanage, a story of mysterious deaths, a conspiracy of silence, and a search for justice, details the horrific abuse of children living at St. Joseph's Orphanage in Burlington, Vermont, and the survivors' ongoing battle to hold the church accountable. Author Christine Kenneally joins me now. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, congratulations on this reporting. And we'll talk through this. This isn't just this one orphanage in Vermont. This is around the world. You did layered reporting on this for 10 years, reported on it for BuzzFeed, then went back for this book. But ultimately, what fundamentally did you learn about this structure of abuse in orphanages?
Yes, that it's pervasive, that it's completely invisible, even now, even after 2002 and the pre-sexual abuse crisis. There were millions of children in the 20th century who spent time in orphanages, people who are still 50, 60, 70 years old now. They suffered emotional abuse, sexual abuse, and physical abuse, and at the time it was completely invisible to the outside world, and until recently it has remained so.
Well, who were these orphans? You write this was not Shirley Temple, this was not Little Orphan Annie.
Right. That's right. So mostly these were families who were affected by poverty in some way. Perhaps one of the parents had died. Maybe they died in war in World War II. Maybe they died, there'd been illness in the family, or there was just struggle. There might have been addiction, or the parents might have separated. Sometimes I heard plenty of stories that the priest would just go along to the newly single mother and suggest that she put her children in the orphanage as a way to sort of take the load off, get her own, go to work herself and get the children educated. So rarely was it the case that anyone in an orphanage was an actual orphan who'd lost both parents.
So let's move to St. Joseph's in Burlington, Vermont. Perhaps because we can identify with something in our own backyard and therefore be horrified by what we learn. You were incredulous at points about what was so hard to believe about some of the things that you started to hear.
I was. The stories were just so extraordinary. Initially, people would tell me about physical abuse, and sometimes that ranged from what you would consider the normal spectrum of 1940s, 1950s corporal punishment, kids being whacked on the knuckles, that sort of thing. But inside St. Joseph's, it included abuse that was so violent and so unhinged. Adults, then children, remembered blood splashing up against the walls, remembered children being thrown downstairs, and psychological abuse as well, children being held outside windows upside down to punish them and to terrify them as well. That's just a small amount of what I discovered. Every story led me to another story, and each was more incredible than the last.
And we're getting a bit psychological here, but and you write about this, about you're having to move forward to believe these stories. Even after all the reporting you'd done, why was that so out of the realm for you?
It just was a matter of accruing the evidence, because these were memories from a very long time ago. It's really important when the claims are dramatic, when the stakes are high, to verify as much as you possibly can. Eventually, what really helped was just staying with the story for long enough that someone's story from the 40s was finally verified 2 years later by someone else's story, that there was a pattern very much of the kind of treatment, but also specific individuals were named. It all knitted itself together in an incredibly compelling way. It just took a really long time and a lot of reporting to do that.
So here is where it becomes, I think, still incomprehensible to so many of us, that here you have an institution in Burlington, Vermont. It's right there publicly, but we have no idea. They had no idea at the time, decades ago, what was going on. How was that allowed to happen? How could they keep those secrets in those brick walls?
Yeah, so one of the really strictly held values of the nuns at the orphanage was obedience, not just goodness, not just charity, not just kindness, but obedience. And that was very much framed as a spiritual value. So was silence. There are messages all through the documentations that I was able to see from the Sisters of Providence, where they are enjoined again and again to be silent, and specifically with respect to priests who came and went in the house. It wasn't just the priests who were abusive, though. It was the nuns as well. Children were abused by male and female predators. And, it was so closed off. In the 1990s, people came forward. There was this moment where individuals had acquired enough resources, I think, to finally be willing to come out and tell their story, even though they were still very traumatized. The culture was slightly more willing to hear it. A group of them got together, they engaged in litigation against the diocese, and they were crushed by that process. So what could have been an incredibly important moment, not just in Vermont history, but American history, was just shattered.
When you say crushed, what do you mean?
The litigation failed. The judges basically said the statute of limitations ruled most people out. So most stories were told and then just dismissed again. Some people were able to settle. I think those were the ones where, the evidence based on correlation from other kids was just undeniable. But in settling, they were afraid to ever talk about it again. So this sort of very destructive process of litigation meant that these very traumatized people went away, often feeling incredibly defeated and utterly exhausted and still not believed. It took a long time before they were willing to talk about what happened to them again.
I'll return to them in a moment, but again, we're forced to reconcile how this can happen within a church structure. Here in this case, it's the Catholic Church structure. There's obviously nothing religiously fundamental about harming, abusing, murdering children. Why did this happen? Why was this whole system in place there?
Yes. So that's the question, and I think, in fact, a number of people have come up to me after readings since the book came out and have said, absolute power corrupts, or power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And I think it's very true of St. Joseph's and all these other orphanages. There was a priest in charge. He was very much treated as the god. There were 20 or 30 nuns beneath him, and as I said, very much committed to obedience and to silence. And, there was a culture of protecting the church over and above protecting children. In addition to that, inside these institutions, children were dehumanized in an extraordinary way beyond what we think of normally as abuse. Many of them were addressed just by a number. Their name was replaced with a number when they entered the orphanage. Children were told they had to sleep in a certain position and not move throughout the night. And if they did, they would be punished. And I've spoken to people who were woken in the middle of the night by a whack to the head from a nun. So I think the culture of silence must have been incredibly encouraging to predators. Any predators in the church would have known that access to children would have been both easy and untraceable, essentially, at these orphanages. I'm sure some of the nuns felt the same way. And then there was this sort of large group of people around them protecting them. From my reporting and based on the church's own documentation, which only came out in 2006, long after they'd engaged in the 1990s litigation, it's clear that 6 of the 8 priests who were in charge of the orphanage, who were the god at the orphanage, between the years of the 1930s and the 1970s, they were all predators.
So this is what maybe it's my stage of life at this point, that I've been fixated on this recently. I don't know if you can answer this question, but what is it about somebody that allows them to perpetrate this kind of violent abuse? I think it's even more incomprehensible when they're in a system where they're looking around, they're seeing others do it. Maybe it's fortunate that neither of us could possibly understand it, but I just can't understand it. I don't know if you have insight in your reporting.
I understand that, and I still feel shocked myself. People have been coming up to me and introducing themselves, people that I never spoke to report the book, telling me part of their story. I still feel shocked about what happened to them. As far as what allows it to happen, I think it's actually really complicated, and that's why this book is really important, but I think it should be the first of many. This is a massive system that requires so much more attention from historians and journalists and scholars and researchers. So essentially, there were some individuals in these places that I think can be fairly described as sociopaths or psychopaths, people who took great pleasure in hurting others and who felt no guilt about it. And then around them, you had individuals who were perhaps not quite as extreme as that, but situationally, they became violent and aggressive too. The children were dehumanized. They felt they could take whatever it was they were angry about out on the children, and the system supported that. So there were individuals who kids sometimes remembered as mostly good, but occasionally terrible. So I think there was just this huge spectrum of terrible adult behavior.
I want to bring something up on the screen. I was struck by this line in your book, that this trauma was unique in particular and not yet fully understood by modern psychology or psychiatry. That means not fully understood today. We think we're so advanced, we think we've seen so much, we've covered so many of these stories, but what is it that makes this, even today, difficult to process?
Yes, because of the complete way in which these children were just cut off from the rest of the world. They were just entirely incarcerated and at the mercy of this system and of these individual abusers in that system as well. Certainly we've learned so much about trauma in the last few decades, and one of the most important insights from the pre-sexual abuse scandal is this dawning understanding that still I think needs to be driven home now, is that it takes decades sometimes for people to acknowledge what happened to them. That is a normal and natural process, and that is why the statute of limitations on sexual abuse claims for children, as well as physical and emotional abuse claims for children, where they exist, work for predators, absolutely work to the advantage of predators.
I said a moment ago that I wanted to return to the victims who now were I think many people are wondering about their memories because it was decades ago. We've seen court trials go awry because defense attorneys will attack their memories. Where do these victims stand now, and how credible are people finding them?
Yeah, so in the 1990s, a lot of people took the stand, gave depositions, and their memories were very aggressively attacked by the lawyers for the defense. I've spoken to them 10, 20 years later, tracked a lot of these people down, and by bringing their stories together, it's really clear to me that the memories are solid. The memories are absolutely solid. Sometimes they're backed up by documents that I've found, even documents that were later released by the diocese. Trauma obviously affects different people differently, but certainly in the case of a lot of people I spoke to, it really froze in time what happened to them, and the vividness and the physicality with which they were able to describe what happened to them certainly had stayed with them forever, and they were able to tell me about it, and then I was able to corroborate quite a lot of those stories.
So I was one of those reporters. I was one of thousands of reporters around the globe who began reporting on this, in my case, for about a year after the church sexual abuse crisis broke here in Boston. I thought we had all done our jobs. We had uncovered so much that this had been fully exposed. Here we are 20 years later?
Yes.
And you're finding more and more stories. Do you have any idea the scope of what's left to be discovered?
Yeah, I mean, you did your job, and there was so much, and that wave that started in Boston in 2002, that is still crashing around the world. So just recently in Europe, Spain, Portugal, France held government inquiries, and for the first time validated the stories of victims. In France, I think there's an estimate of 200,000 kids that have been affected, a minimum 200,000. So that story's still unfolding. This is a really important part of that story, though, too. And there is much more. St. Joseph's Orphanage in Burlington was just one of the orphanages in that state. There are orphanages in every state in America, and all of their stories need to be told.
Canada, it seems to be one of the only countries that has put together a task force for moving this forward and really addressing this forthrightly. What are we facing here in the United States to make it an easier path?
It would make a big difference if state governments got behind the victims and helped them. So after the 2018 BuzzFeed News article, the State Attorney General in Vermont launched both a criminal investigation and a restorative justice process. And that restorative justice process was not just incredibly important for the victims, it was a way of the state saying, we believe you, we should have listened to you a long time ago, and we're here to support you now. But in fact, it's enabled these survivors to effect huge change. Already, it's just been a few years. They contributed to the repeal of the statute of limitations on sexual abuse in Vermont. They also were solely responsible for the repeal of the statute of limitations on childhood physical abuse in Vermont, both in civil litigation. They have had a burst of creativity. They've published their own book. They've written their stories. And right now they're looking for donations for a memorial garden down at St. Joseph's in honour not just of what happened to them, but the 13,000 children who passed through in the history of the orphanage, and to make sure people don't forget so it doesn't happen again.
Well, Christine Kenneally, it's amazing reporting, as I said. Thank you for your work.
Thank you so much.
The book again is Ghosts of the Orphanage, a story of mysterious deaths, a conspiracy of silence, and a search for justice.